let's try this. Not as good. We have other options here that I can use. I know exactly what the problem is now. I think we have it figured. Wow. So we'll be obviously be deleting this portion of it here. So let me just. All right, so we got that part in, and then let's just get this. We're ready to go. I think we've got it. So for those of you who struggled through this first 1.5 minutes of nada, we will actually delete this portion so you won't have to endure our technical difficulties. So this is Greg for Teslafaninsight. There's an interesting problem that popped up that we did some research on that we thought was kind of an interesting solution, which is that there's a problem right now, and that problem is that Tesla has produced approximately 3,000 vehicles in the Shanghai facilities and has now started shipping them to the 49 locations that they have sort of sales, service, and test driving facilities. So the open question was, why is it that all these vehicles have been produced, but none have been sold? The official statement made by Tesla is that the sales will not begin until the latter part, approximately the 24th of January in 2020. And so Chinese consumers interested in Teslas now will be able to buy the US inventory of Teslas, perhaps the lowest line model that might be left on the showroom, but they'll be forced into buying the higher line models, either dual motor for the longer range or performance, until those new vehicles come out. And so therefore the focus of our show here was, why is it that there's this delay? Well, it turns out that the only major thing that happens between now, which is the beginning of December in 2019, and January the 24th, is that the Chinese government has elected to start decreasing the volume of subsidies. One of the numbers we saw was approximately $14,000 per car. So Tesla actually doesn't get the money. Consumers get a tax credit of $14K per car if the vehicle was built in China. So we were kind of intrigued by the fact that the number one issue holding up the approval of sales, because production has been approved, is simply the fact that the Chinese government hasn't given approval for the sales portion. So Tesla's solution to this has been to go ahead and start putting out vehicles. From what our calculation is, in the Fremont factory, cars are produced by hand at a rate of approximately 128 cars a day on 2 shifts. So given that the factory in China has 3,500 employees and a fully automated line, the minimum production that we're forecasting from that facility is about 200 vehicles a day. And there's a lot of video evidence to suggest that in the back of the building, there's a large amount of inventory, namely 100 to 200 cars that are sitting there. But just like in the Fremont plant, what's been happening is that you literally have trucks or rail cars lined up in process to ship those vehicles. So what it's our estimate is that those vehicles are now being shipped to, in essence, being staged by warehousing them at the sales facilities around the country. And that way, once all the approvals are in line, the customers who've reserved those vehicles can pick them up. Now, the question is, there's sort of a background question about this, which is, what happens to profit and revenue for Tesla relative to this based on this delay? And the answer that pops up is that the initial reservation of the vehicle, which started, I believe, in mid-July, required a $3,000 deposit. We now have a situation where soon after that deposit, so once you do the full configuration of your vehicle in anticipation of delivery, is when the full payment is due. So it's our estimate that all those vehicles, Tesla has the cash for those vehicles, even though they have not been delivered yet. So it'll be interesting to see whether Tesla chooses to recognize the revenue this year, given that they got the money for the vehicles, or they'll just have large amounts of cash on their balance sheet and claim those sales when the Chinese government allows them to do so on delivery in January. But it's a kind of an interesting circumstance. I do believe this gives sort of a last gasp to the domestic manufacturers in terms of their ability to perhaps push out final sales before Tesla enters the marketplace at the low end and starts to affect things. We were also intrigued by the circumstance because it was our estimate or thought that it was in Tesla's best interest to maybe start producing with a couple of shifts, 24 hours a day right away, to try to capture as much of this discount for the consumers as possible. But clearly, the Chinese government had a different opinion on it. And the fact that the balance sheet of a number of companies that are competing with Tesla in China is big time impacted by the extra cash that they might garner from these sales that come with the lower subsidy. So it ends up being a win-win because Tesla gets the money anyway, but it'd be a bigger win for Tesla if they were allowed to go full out on production to capture as many sales while the discount is available for their customers in the interim. So we'll keep you posted as more official information comes out, but it turns out that other than that, this item regarding the $14,000 tax discount, there's really no other logical reason why there would be a delay. The other thing is Tesla has gotten into a process right now where they're actually doing special tests. There's actually a whole bunch of test driving going on. So part of what the new fleet is being done with is to simply kind of get cars out there and prove to the local Chinese that the vehicle being built in China is on par with what's coming out of Fremont. So that's another data point to consider. The next thing that we wanted to take a look at is that with the introduction of the Cybertruck, one of our estimates was that Mexican drug lords would be the biggest buyers of the Cybertruck, given that you have the bulletproof qualities, long range, fairly high price, at least for the top model. But to our surprise, there's an interesting sort of arrival of a mayor in a Mexican city that's come in to purchase, or at least reserve, 15 of the vehicles with his own cash. So we have to say thumbs up. One of the mysteries that I've had for the last 20 or 30 years is how do you, with the Mexican cartels moving around Mexico with very large amounts of bulletproof SUVs and heavy U.S. purchased guns with which to shoot at each other and at the police forces, I have to admit, for bravery, one of the groups that I've been amazed by is the willingness of certain members of the Mexican military / police force to be out and on patrol with the threat of being under attack from very high caliber equipment and bulletproof vehicles in competitors. As you know, there was recently a shootout in which 20 people died, 3 of whom were police. And in essence, you had one of those encounters between heavily armed cartel members and local police. And 3 police officers, they actually attacked a police station. So the intrigue is kind of, how do you get these people to take those jobs is what I couldn't figure out. And now we have a mayor saying, hey, we have an opportunity to perhaps find vehicles that allow us to not necessarily deal with the heaviest artillery of AK-47s, but at least we can deal with the 9mm level of bulletproof for our vehicles. And I think that this is going to trigger, I think, a wave of mayors across Mexico looking at the Cybertruck as a solution, because they can't afford to pay for double or triple the price fully armored SUVs like the cartels can, but at least they can give their police officers an opportunity to be competitive. It should be noted that the claim from the mayor was that the reason he purchased the vehicles was that there's actually $1.2 million in savings over the life of a typical vehicle. So the reason why he stepped up for the deposit right away was simply to focus on the fact that it's a terrific vehicle with the kind of mileage, et cetera, that sets up his town to save a great deal of money on fuel as well as on repair costs. And so, yeah, I guess you could go with that argument, but I would say that the fact that those things are bulletproof to 9mm caliber and below is a big reason or motivation for doing this, because we know that the cartels are very well prepared to, in essence, go to war and have been shooting and killing a lot of people of all stripes in the process. The next thing that I wanted to sort of roll into here is the fact that we have a show coming up focused on Rivian relative to the Cybertruck. Now, when Rivian first came out, I have to admit, we kind of avoided the story. And the main reason we avoided it is what happens when Tesla introduces a pickup truck. And I think Rivian's answer to that was, we'll go 400 miles of range versus the average of 300 miles that Tesla offers. And as we're seeing now, it's pretty clear that Tesla is coming in at 500 miles of range for the Cybertruck. So we really think that this shows that there's kind of a disaster here for Rivian, because the mandate for the company has kind of disappeared. And to the credit of the folks who built this, they have currently 1,000 employees, and they're preparing to manufacture by the end of 2020 in a plant in Michigan. But we'd have to say that we're seeing some really good sort of business deal making going on by the folks associated with it. Number one, they have the deposit in 100,000 vehicles ordered by Amazon, which is great. Number two, they also have their relationship with Ford Motor Company and the $500 million that was put in by Ford. So when you add up those numbers, you start to get the feeling that, let's say 30 to 40% of the company was sold. So market cap or value of this company was perceived to be about $2 or $3 billion. It's our estimate that the value of the company got cut in half as soon as the Rivian or the Cybertruck showed up. And so what this means then is that for a company that's supposed to produce 50,000 trucks a year, 30 to 50,000, the fact of the matter is, there's a huge loss of sales there, because if Tesla is rolling 250,000 deposits, we'd argue that a third to maybe even half of the likely Rivian buyers have now switched to the Cybertruck. And so now the losses for Rivian, both in sales and market cap, are in the billions of dollars. So let's call it $5 billion lost by Rivian in this process. So sort of there's kind of a good news, bad news about this. One, the bad news is for Rivian, because their investors are now in a sort of a tough position, because in essence, there was a market space open before Tesla arrived that allowed them to successfully enter and perhaps make some money. Now that Tesla has actually arrived in the space, we have a completely different situation where you have a former wide open space other than Bollinger for them to enter. And now they're in a tough slot, because yes, they have the fallback position of using their skate within the Amazon van production. But what do they do with trucks when you need a certain number, call it 3,000 to 5,000 a month, or at least 5 to 10,000 vehicles a year to get to break even, and the number of vehicles that Cybertruck is pulling in starts to close out how many of those sales are really going to be available. And so, so what this suggests then is that the big winner here, we think, could be Ford, because the reason Ford put the cash in is that they were getting the benefit of the Rivian exposure and access, and being positioned to potentially buy the company, buy their investment, and it cuts the cycle time down for how long it is that they have to develop their own product. So we had assumed that Ford was almost ready to go with their electric pickup truck to protect the F-150 franchise, but they're talking about being ready in 3 or 4 years when the Rivian is going to be ready next year. So one of the nice outs for Rivian here is simply to draw closer with their Ford partner, and then switch from that Ford partner, switch from their original plan of production to leveraging the relationship with the Ford partner, because you have all kinds of issues that they'd have to deal with anyway, be it parts, service, sales. All of those can now come through the Ford partnership successfully. The only problem is if they'd gotten this done a year earlier, they would have been able to have a negotiating position that was stronger, because they would have been the best solution in the space pre the Cybertruck. So now I think they're going to have to take at least a 50% haircut on market cap in order to get this deal done. And if they don't get this deal done before the Cybertruck starts rolling, the haircut they take could even be more severe than the 50% we just described, with the exception being that if in fact the van works well for Amazon, and Amazon doesn't choose to increase the amount of investment they do, you do have the potential for them to use their skate to offer the same van to other entities, especially if it's offering extended long ranges still that are not being offered by other entities like Daimler-Benz via their Sprinter electric vehicle, etc. So we'll keep you posted on how and what we learn in the process, and look forward to doing those updates. I noticed that we got several hellos from all over the world, Bahamas, from Deutschland, from a number of spots, and we wanted to say hello and thanks for the comments. I had a couple of frozen moments here because we try to integrate the comments of viewers at the back end so that we can have a vibrant dialogue. And I did see the comment regarding South Africa and Tesla, or South Africa in China in the form of Elon Musk. So I did see that comment. For those of you who had sort of significant comments and statements, we'll repost what you had to say at the end of the video so you or others could comment on what was said. And so we look forward to following up on that. Our next show, I think, is going to be really, really interesting because we actually have an advisor to the show who does research for the U.S. Army relative to electric issues. And we actually started a dialogue regarding the Cybertruck being adopted by the Army. And it's, there's a comment being made about in Bermuda, it's a once-in-a-lifetime purchase that really fits a whole bunch of parameters. And so I'd have to agree with that in terms of flexibility and durability. So what we were focused on for the next show we're going to do is sort of all the details we get back from our Army researcher. We have a number of items that he posted. There were elements of why the military wanted to move towards hybrids or EVs, and a good possibility that, as we described, this is a fit with some minor changes to address the needs of the military. And clearly, if it works, it'll be sort of adopted by many others in the process. So we look forward to getting that out. We'll have that show out by tomorrow, and look forward to getting all of you sort of involved and engaged in that conversation. At any rate, Haven't seen any new comments or questions pop up, and I think we've covered what we wanted to do today. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Wanted to remind you, 25 leg lifts to make sure you strengthen the quad muscles, and the knee is also strengthened, and it helps in terms of potential issues later. The second thing we wanted to mention is that don't forget to don't go to bed within 4 hours of eating. Best case, let the food digest 2 hours minimum. No acid reflux issues there. And no more than once a week fried foods is what our kidney doctor is saying, because the body just stores it and sets it up for type 2 diabetes. Any rate, thanks once again for joining us. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Sorry about the technical difficulties. We'll go ahead and cut that out of the show. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Tschüss, mach's gut, au revoir, lehitro, choda hafez. And in Jamaica we say, enough respect, walk good man. Hedge do is my definition in Swedish, but I've got to learn how it's pronounced properly. So there is hope for my Swedish friends as well. Zia is another one I'm seeing here from BW. Have a great day. We look forward to our next conversation, and bye for now.